I would like to start by asking your pardon. I've taught for almost 50 years standing up. I can't do it today. I got to have something here to keep my feet steady. Look, the subject is a serious one. You all know it. It's something that nobody has to tell you that it's important. But why are we talking about it? I want to suggest, number one, that capitalism is a very much misunderstood term. Maybe not here, but it certainly is in the United States, and it causes us a lot of trouble. Misunderstanding is a way to what we did in 2008. It's not some kooks. It's right in the heart of the academic community in the United States. It was with the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. We had people making dumb mistakes. And the unfortunate thing about it is it keeps right on going. You don't change theory just because it's wrong. All right? It takes something else for that to happen. So I want to go back through and say, I can do a couple of things today. Number one is to try to give you a clearer idea of what capitalism is and isn't. Once you have that, you can see where some of the mistakes are. Second, once you have that, you can also look at the evolution of capitalism in space and time. I want to do that right at the end. My editor, who was in Germany, originally said, Bruce, nobody can do that. Nobody has done it. Nobody has had a definition of capitalism that was good enough to go by country and say, when did they become capitalist societies?
Okay, great.
Okay. I've done it. It doesn't say that it's perfect. Nobody's going to do this perfect. I'm sticking my neck out and saying, here's when it happened in a number of countries. In the book that I wrote on this, it's for about 20. Well, that's not a lot, but it's something. It's enough to show you that capitalism does not evolve the way markets do at all. So I want to give you some sense of that. Now, the third thing that I want to try to connect it with where you are now is this. Capitalism and democracy are the two leading problem-solving systems in use in the world. Capitalism was figured out as a term 150 years ago, still has no definition. I'm going to give you a definition. Don't say this right. I think it's better than anything else that's out there, and very much better. But I offer it to you as a definition. Then I want to give you, at the end, how it evolved in space and time. I'm just going to take a little bit of time because you can see very quickly what that is. But I want to do this with a question. I would like you to be thinking about, does capitalism come before democracy or after democracy, or it doesn't matter? I'm going to say to you that the historical record is very clear about this. If you were studying this in a political science department, people would show this to you. If you're studying it in an economics department, you're unlikely to ever hear about it. Right? But you're right on the cusp of this. And thinking about it, and people like yourself thinking about it, I think it can be helpful to you. I'm not going to give you the answers, but I want to give you the question. Which comes first? Does it matter? So I'm going to try to give you a sense of the definition and how it works. That's going to be most of the talk. Then there's going to be part of it that's saying, here's what the historical record looks like as to where it evolved and when it evolved and what the time lag is that's involved. For many people, so I'm going here now. By the way, if I said, what does this have to do with what I taught for 50 years? Almost nothing. This is really based on a liberal arts education at a good liberal arts school, and an interest in these things, and some parents that were interested in them when I was small. So there's some of it that's connected with business administration, but I don't have to tell you that I'm an oddball, and I've been an oddball for a long time. This is coming from doing something, and the school financing me with research assistance for 20 years to write a book. The book was just published last November, so a couple of months ago. For a lot of people, including those that are writing for the Financial Times, those of you who read it, capitalism is described as basically just a system of markets. Now, these are the best guys in the world. They're people I read. I think they're really neat. I think they're terribly wrong. It is not just a system of markets. That's the basic point I would like to get across to you today. Capitalism is a system of governance. It's a system of indirect governance. So I'm going to have to say something about what's governance and something about what's indirect as compared to direct in the governance. That makes it a little bit hard if you're completely unfamiliar in this area, but I hope that you'll stick with me and say, oh, this was interesting, because we're going to be dealing with these questions right here in Libya for sure. One way to get a handle on this right off the bat and to see that it's not just markets is this. The U.S. has a 3,000-mile frontier with Canada. Trade goes across the frontier, people go across the frontier, money grows across the frontier. Capitalism does not go across the frontier. The United States has a different capitalist system from Canada. We became aware of that in 2008 when we had a crisis and $1 trillion a day going out of the money market funds. Yes, $1 trillion a day going out of the money market funds. The Canadians did not have a financial crisis. No banks went broke. They had kept their regulatory system. We had not. We had a crisis of deregulation, not of capitalism. It was a blunder. And we had the top people in the White House, the Ministry of Finance, and the central bank all trying to deregulate right up to the eve of this panic and the exit of the money. The people who've had this right all along are not the economists. They're the political scientists. Let me give you a quote, and it's not really a quote, it's a paraphrase of somebody that was at the top of the profession in Stanford, because it's the best I've ever seen and way better than I could do. He says, capitalism and democracy are the two leading problem-solving systems of society. They coexist, they overlap, they compete for power. Over time, they transform one another. That's a mind-boggling agenda. It is hardly recognized in the academic community in the United States. Certainly not in the school where I was. It's totally absent. They coexist and they compete for power. Over time, they transform one another. You're going to be looking at all of those things here because you're trying to do both of them at once. I don't have to tell you that. So what does it mean to say this? Well, you've got to understand how the governance works. So let me go the second piece of this to the difference between the direct and the indirect. All of you, and especially all of you in a business, know what direct governance is. That's when the subordinate shows up in your office and you tell them to go back and shut the door. That's direct, okay? Tell them what to do. That's the one we all know. You do a government bureau that way, you do a firm and all the rest of it. And the French used to run their economy that way. This is rather different. I hope it's familiar. It's not familiar to a lot of Americans. It's the way you run football everywhere except in the United States. Right? You got boundaries, you got markers, you got a set of rules. You can do anything you want as long as you obey the rules. That's capitalism. You can do anything you want as long as you obey the rules. Now, part of what that means is there are no free markets. The use of free markets as a way to describe capitalism is a huge mistake. Every market is regulated. It has to be regulated or it would look like chaos. And it cannot be regulated by the players. So when somebody says he's got self-regulating markets, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's talking ideology, not fact. All you have to do is say to yourself, what would European football look like without regulators? Those of you that saw the World Cup about 6 years ago saw what happened when somebody irritated the French all-star and he turned around and knocked down the player that did it to him. Out came the red card, he was out of the game. That's what would be going on all the time if we didn't have the referees. It has to be regulated, this has to be regulated, and this is what gives you what's the basic system of how to think about capitalism. It's the same thing as organized sports. Look, both of them are three-level systems. That's why this hasn't been discussed in the 150 years that the term exists. The top level of governance in both of these systems is a political authority. It's a political authority because it has to be a political authority. You have to have the power and the legitimacy to design and change the system. This is not just the players playing football. They're playing football according to the rules, or the red card comes out and they're out of the game. That's part of what's missing in the capitalism in the United States. We didn't get into trouble by too much regulation. We got into trouble by too little regulation. The former head of the Federal Reserve was one of the few people who stood up and talked about this as it was going on. It was Paul Volcker. It's the same. The political level has the power to appoint the referees, to draw up the rules, to change the rules, to modernize the system. Libya's going to have some dramatic problems trying to figure out how to modernize the system when you're doing it for capitalism and democracy at what looks to an outsider like you're trying to do them both at the same time. Right? This is going to be very difficult. I'm sure there's at least a couple of guys in the room here that have some sense of just how difficult it's going to be to do that. It's very hard. So I want to ask you to be thinking about that. You're the people that need to know and understand. You're the people that need to be able to interpret for your neighbors what's going on. You've got an unprecedentedly difficult set of circumstances to think about. The players feel like they're free to compete. If you're listening to your business friends, and especially from the United States, all they talk about is free markets. They don't exist. They may be under-regulated, they may be over-regulated, they may be badly regulated, but if they're not regulated, they're chaos. You can't do that. The worst we've got in the United States is to watch a hockey game. If you think you can run an organized sport without referees, watch an American game of hockey. It'd look like something out of the Middle Ages of people beating each other on the head with a club until you haul them off the field. That's unregulated hockey. So you have to do this. Now, let me go from that to saying that government doesn't just hire the referees and draw up the rules. Government can deliberately tilt the market. That's what being in government's about. You're trying to induce policy changes because there's societal preferences to be dealt with. I was at dinner last night with somebody who studies these things here. Said the old regime took the property records and burned them. You've got some really big problems to figure out how you go back and reestablish your property rights. All right? Most people don't have that to deal with, and you're going to have to deal with it in real time. I'm glad I'm going to be taking the plane and going home, because that's all of a job. But the thing for you to understand is, if it's sports, somebody would say, hey, you're tilting against A or B, you're cheating. In capitalism, no, they're not cheating. They've got a policy reason for what they're doing. They're changing the slope of the field. All right? That's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to figure out what does the public want if the circumstances change or the public voting preferences change. You expect a democratically elected government to change the slope of the field. Doug, can you put the next one? Look, oil costs the same in the United States to produce as it does. I mean, the barrel of oil at the coast is the same whether we're in the US or Europe. The Europeans have put huge taxes on gasoline, as we should have. So the price of the pump is very different. Americans used to be able to buy much bigger cars, waste the gasoline, do everything that you think of with the American standard of living. The Europeans aren't that much smarter. They had to pay 3 times as much for a gallon of gas. It makes them buy a smaller car, be more careful what they do, and take the train. So the trains are better. Look, you change the whole game, and you can change the framework of the market by action through government. It's not the invisible hand, it's the visible hand. It's the visible hand that shapes the market. We do the same thing in pharmaceuticals. We shape the pharmaceuticals by saying we're going to have free prices. So we got the highest prices in the world. Nobody else is close. People move their research labs to the United States because that's the chance to recover. I live in a community that has very high real estate prices thanks to the fact that we got a bunch of Swiss pharmaceutical companies a few blocks away driving up the price of the real estate. Now, you've got to recognize that when government is doing this through the same kind of a system. Government is also run indirectly in a democracy. You're using two sets of markets. You're using a market to nominate and elect officers to a government, and you're using a market in a legislature. Those markets sound like the same thing as capitalism. Well, in a way they are, in a way they're utterly different. Capitalism, you're using the market to get equilibrium in supply and demand and bring things closer together. Political markets is the opposite. If you got 51%, you win. If you got 49%, nice try, come back some other time. You've been wiped out. There's a huge incentive for people to mobilize their money to buy the result that they want. So if you get the incomes really unequal, you'll get what we have in the United States. You've got rich people buying government, and they no longer have to be corrupt. What they do is go buy the legislatures and have them write the legislation exactly the way you want it. Now, I'm not kidding you. We're redoing the legal code in the United States courtesy of business. Business is saying, this is what I want. And I'll pay you in a perfectly legal way because the Supreme Court has said you can do damn near anything you want. So we don't have to call it cheated, we call it lobbying. Anybody else would say, Bruce, you guys are so corrupt you don't even know it because you're publishing it in the newspapers. Now let me put these two together for a minute. Yes. Look, there's only one way to readdress this. If I say it's the same government that directs democracy and that directs the economic system. It's the same. You only got one, right? We think we might have more than that, but you only have one. The political institutions go to the political markets. They govern society on one side. The economic institutions govern the economic markets on the other side. They're relatively simple. They're distinct. But, excuse me, from the political market, you have a feedback loop to government. You can say, hey, we don't like what you're doing, and we're going to vote you out of office. That's what democratic government is supposed to be about. There's nothing that works that way on the business side. There's no legitimate way for the business community to come back and say, hey, fellas, let's adjust this. What we're going to do instead is we're going to decide that we're going to contribute to your campaign, we're going to contribute to your campaign some more, we'll take you out, we'll give you some money, we'll contribute in another way, and you build a really crooked system. Canada has dealt with this by saying, that's fine, nobody can contribute to a political campaign except a citizen. No NGOs, no labor unions, no corporations, no nothing. You got to be a registered individual. In the United States, we're allowing people to contribute in unlimited amounts, which is just an absolutely open invitation for corruption. Our government is for sale, right? We're not a model at this stage for anybody. Pardon me, I hope I've made that subtle enough that it comes through. It is really uncomfortable seeing this stuff happen in the United States and seeing how few people are aware of how bad it is. Wealth, this is not an American invention. We just happen to have deregulated. The biggest deregulation in the United States was the deregulation of the political system, which happened before the economic deregulation. That's really what opened everything up wide. We deregulated the political system first, and they take away the rules. So we've got this to deal with. It's always there. We've just given the lobbyists and the fixers and so on open season to do what they want. And we have inequalities of income now that are almost exactly what they were at the end of the 1920s, and for the same reason. Gigantic concentrations of wealth buying the government that they want. And so we get this progressive increase in income and corruption. In the 1930s, we finally dealt with this when the president had an absolutely crushing victory where he had a 2-to-1 margin in the Senate and a 3-to-1 margin in the House. We've never had margins like that before. We don't have it now. The chances that we can reform this by going through the legislature now are very close to zero. So it's a very pessimistic set of circumstances to be in at home. I haven't said anything like this that's this blunt at home. I'm doing it because I'm far enough away that nobody's listening. There's a tendency to equate democracy with elections. We have a lot of that at home. I hope you're not doing that here. It's more complicated than that. The guy who had this closest to right in my terms was a Republican, and he used to walk around in black suits with a tall black hat. His name was Abraham Lincoln. And he put it very nicely when he gave a speech at Gettysburg, which was the biggest of the battlefields of the Civil War. This was to commemorate the slaughter at Gettysburg, when he said the purpose of this battle was to test whether we could have government of the people, by the people, for the people. The big challenge in democracy is not government by the people. It's what we like to talk about because you can count how many people vote. The big test is, can you make it for the people, which the simple way to say is, can you do something that represents the interests of the middle class so that it recognizes we've got higher incomes and it recognizes we've got lower incomes, but we're trying to run it for something in the middle, not letting the elite buy control of the government or the mob take control of the government. This is not easy to do. It's not science. We got a lot of people who don't want to do it because you can't reduce it to arithmetic. That's where the real test is. Lincoln was the guy that got it right, and the political scientists are now beginning to come back and do this for us. How do you get government for the people? That's worth debating. That's worth asking. Now, let me give you an example of this. California used to be a model of governance. It was a model state government among states in the United States. Almost anybody would have put it as number one. It was a model in the world. California is about the 9th largest economy in the world. California is still rich. TED's headquarters are out there. This is rich, prosperous, high technology. California is bankrupt. California is destroying itself. Right? They did it by going to direct democracy. They've got more popular involvement, but it's popular involvement in an unregulated thing, and it's therefore out to be bought, and that's what's happened. So it's not any remedy in itself at all. Hey, my clock is running away with me. Move this thing up another one. We done? Look, here's what happens when you get a mistaken definition of capitalism. This is the thinking process for Alan Greenspan. Alan Greenspan said we don't need any regulation, we don't need any government involvement, and when people told him we had a bubble in the real estate market, which he had been specifically given the right through the Fed to control, he said, there's no point. It's a self-regulating market, the market's smarter than the government, I'm not going to do anything. Literally, I'm not going to do anything. Let them, because the private sector is smart enough to regulate it. It took a disaster to change this in the particular circumstances. The ideology was that strong. Now, I've got some things that were conclusions. I'm going to skip them. Let me go to the very last. Let me do this just for you to think about it for a minute and then ask you the question that I wanted to. This is roughly when societies became capitalist. Anybody else doing it's going to have some variations. I have never seen anybody try to do this. I've stuck my neck out. I used to raise chickens. I know that there are risks when you stick your neck out. All right? Look, people are going to come around at some point to saying Venice is the original home for capitalism. There's some very compelling circumstances. Why? From roughly 1300 to 1500, it's also the richest place in the world. That's why it's such a nifty place to go visit. But look, Venice is capitalist before 1300. I don't know exactly when because the records get more difficult. If I put the rest of up there and put Italy, Italy isn't capitalist until after 1860. Right? There's a difference of about 500 years at a minimum. If I take the Netherlands was second, but one of the big surprises in doing this is looking at the United States. The United States became capitalist very early in Massachusetts. It's hardly ever discussed. Nobody was looking for it. Right? But Mexico and Brazil were both, Northeast Brazil and Mexico both settled before the United States was. They started their economic development before the United States. They were richer than we were up until 1750. By that time, we've already had capitalism for more than a century, and it cuts right in. Mexico and Brazil are neither one of them capitalist till the second half of the 19th century. The U.S. had 300-year lead on them in doing this. It's made a huge difference. Neither one of those countries has managed to catch up for the loss that they had in the period of time. They were running their government to protect the rights of the rich people. Government was not there to promote the middle class. Government was there to protect those rights. So I just say to you that if you look at the historical record, the one I found, capitalism precedes democracy in every case that I looked at, and most of the political scientists would say the same thing. What I want you to ask yourselves is what it means to be going ahead the way you are, and whether you're going to be able to have the capitalism keep up with the democracy. My one thing to say to you for sure would be, some of you ought to be reading some history and looking at this thing and saying, hey, I want to be able to help understand what our questions are and what difference it could make. Thank you.